Good morning. It's Monday, the 11th of December here in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, the CEO of Arm tells us the government needs to make it easier to bring talent into the country.
Central bankers in the US, UK and EU are getting ready for decisions that will set the tone for markets in the months ahead.
Plus, move over Cayman Islands, there's a new haven for billionaires. We look at why the likes of CZ, Adani and Dalio are flocking to Abu Dhabi.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Britain's most successful tech firm says that the country needs to make it easy to attract talent from overseas. Arm's CEO Rene Haas has told Bloomberg that whoever wins the next general election, further restrictions on skilled migration will hurt growth.
Please make it very easy for us to attract world-class talent and attract engineers to come work for Arm, because that is the single largest limiter that we will have for growth is access to talent. And if that gets any more difficult with a change in government that you described with the next election, that would be a headwind I would not want to have to engage on. So I would say my first message would be please make it easy for us to bring people in and hire, and if you can make it even easier, even better.
Rene Haas also says that it's not realistic that the UK can try and replicate the success of Silicon Valley, but that there are ways the country can ramp up innovation. The comments on talent come just days after the government announced measures to reduce the level of skilled migration into the country, with an increase in the minimum salary required for skilled worker visas. Rishi Sunak is under growing political pressure from his own party to reduce net migration after it hit a record high of 745,000 in 2022.
The Prime Minister, meanwhile, faces questions about his handling of the COVID pandemic later. Rishi Sunak's flagship Eat Out to Help Out programme in August of 2020 saw him dubbed Dr. Death by a government official worried about the risks from COVID. This weekend, Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove defended the scheme.
It was not the case that there was a public critique of it. It was an effective way of ensuring that the hospitality industry was supported through a very difficult period. And it was entirely within the broad outlines of rules about social mixing that prevailed at the time.
Despite Gove's account, the then Chief Scientific Advisor Sir Patrick Vallance told the inquiry that Rishi Sunak would have known health experts were worried about his policy when he was Chancellor. It marks the start of a potentially dangerous week for Rishi Sunak, who also faces a crunch vote on his bill to remove asylum seekers to Rwanda.
Bloomberg Economics says that global growth will slow to 2.7% next year, down from 3.1% this year. Leaving aside the global financial crisis in 2009 and the COVID pandemic in 2020, that would be the slowest rate of expansion since the dot-com bubble of 2001. The team at Bloomberg Economics is also shunning the idea of a soft landing in the US. They are forecasting a shallow recession to start soon and stretching into early 2024.
This week could set the tone for the stock market and the economy as we head into 2024, thanks to Tuesday's US inflation print and Wednesday's Fed decision. Speculation that the Federal Reserve will start cutting rates early next year has so far fueled a sharp drop in Treasury yields and a surge in stocks. But former US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers says rate setters need to be cautious.
The moment they turn or announce they're going to turn is going to be a seismic moment. And for that reason, they probably need to be very deliberative and careful about getting to that point and waiting until they see some overwhelming evidence of inflation being locked in low, or see some real evidence of the economy turning over.
Summers' warning comes as the S&P 500 index has added roughly $4 trillion in market value since late October. Participants in Bloomberg's latest Markets Live Pulse survey expect the index to hit a record high by the end of next year.
Now, Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky is headed to Washington to try and break the deadlock over aid in Congress. Further US military support has stalled as Republicans insist that changes to the US-Mexico border policy be tied to help for Ukraine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that it's a critical moment for the country.
Over the past year, it's taken back more than 50% of its territory. It's engaged in a ferocious battle right now along the eastern and southern fronts. We are running out of resources already in the bank to continue to assist them.
In October, Blinken's administration proposed an almost $106 billion emergency spending package, which included $61 billion for Ukraine. The White House budget director warned earlier this month that without a deal, the US would run out of resources to assist Ukraine by the end of the year.
Vladimir Putin and Benjamin Netanyahu spoke at length on Sunday amidst growing tension surrounding the latest Israel-Hamas war. According to a statement from the Israeli Prime Minister's office, Netanyahu criticised Russia's cooperation with Iran and taking sides against Israel at the United Nations. The readout from Russia didn't mention Netanyahu's criticism and focused on the, quote, catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip.
University of Pennsylvania President Liz Magill and the board chair Scott Bok have resigned this weekend. Comes days after congressional testimony in which Magill declined to say that calling for the genocide of Jews always violates the university's code of conduct. Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey and Governor Josh Shapiro joined local leaders in Philadelphia for a rally against anti-Semitism.
Those of us who have the authority in this case, one legislative body, the United States Congress, or two houses of one Congress, is to get them the funds they need so they can fully investigate and prosecute these cases where there is a hostile environment on the campus.
Senator Casey said that reports of anti-Semitic incidents have increased almost fourfold since the start of the war between Israel and Hamas. With Liz Magill's resignation, the focus has turned to the presidents of Harvard and MIT, who were also criticised for their responses before that congressional committee last week.
In a moment, we'll tell you more about the emergence of Abu Dhabi as the newest haven for billionaires. But another story that caught our eye this morning is a piece by Matthew Brooker, the Bloomberg opinion columnist. The headline in itself is pretty provocative. Is the UK ready to be honest about its decline?
Oh, decline. That is a touchstone word, isn't it?
But it's also this idea of being upfront about the challenges the UK faces. Now, Matthew has delved into the recent Resolution Foundation report showing the problems or the challenges of productivity and growing the British economy, and crucially how much it's fallen behind some of its comparable peers like France and Germany. Now, it's a story that we talked about here as well, but it also is part of this idea of how you move on from that and the idea of having to accept the challenges to be able to develop a solution.
To move forward. Yeah, no, absolutely. We spoke to the Resolution Foundation's chief researcher, one of the people that wrote this 291-page document, and Matthew Brooker's sort of done a deeper dive into it, which is fascinating. I think it was a slap in the face, I think, in the UK to realise that middle-income households are 20% poorer than in Germany. I think that's not commonly understood in the UK. Yes, it's a low productivity issue, but Brooker talks about how inertia is also a challenge. So too is magical thinking. But perhaps some sort of signs of optimism, because both the big political parties in the UK were at the launch of the Resolution Foundation's big document. So maybe things are changing. It's a really fascinating piece, not all gloomy. Booker talking about the positive sides of the UK economy. And if we can focus on those, perhaps things will improve.
Yeah, well, let's turn to a related story now. As we mentioned there a moment ago, the CEO of the UK-based tech firm ARM has been speaking to Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie. The Cambridge-based firm designs chips found in some of the world's, most of the world's smartphones, in fact, and plays a key role in the global semiconductor supply chain. It was a wide-ranging interview covering everything from their listing on the New York Stock Exchange in September to the UK's economic ambition and the risks of AI. Rene Haas oversaw the company's $54.5 billion IPO earlier this year and began by discussing how that's changed the way the firm operates.
We've been public now for a few months. Yeah. So I would say I feel like the eyes are upon me a little bit more than they were prior. But on the other hand, I try to think about it in terms of the future of ARM is really not measured in what we are today. It's what we're going to be in a few years. I spend most of my time thinking about where ARM is going to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now. So on one level, yes, it's changed because the eyes are on us. We're a public company. We have to meet our expectations. We have to do exactly what we say we're going to do. But on the other hand, I'd like to think maybe not so much change because I'm thinking about 5 years away, just like I was before the IPO, same way I'm thinking about it today.
I want to talk a little bit about ARM's place in the UK. ARM was conceived, of course, here in Cambridge in the UK. It's now obviously majority owned by a Japanese company, SoftBank, listed in the US. What role do you see the UK playing for ARM in the years ahead?
The UK is our home. It's our headquarters. It's where we were born, and we're always going to be here. So the UK is incredibly central to the future of ARM in so many ways. We've had fantastic cooperation in the 2 years or so that I've become the CEO from the UK government. We've had lots and lots of interaction with them. I have personally. They've looked for lots of different ways to help us grow, whether it's around fast track for talent and such. Because again, that's probably our biggest bottleneck for growth is just getting talent in. But we are very, very committed to the UK. And again, the UK is going to be so critical for our future.
And the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, they want to turn the UK into the next Silicon Valley. Is that realistic, Rene? Really?
There's only one Silicon Valley, right? It's a unique area in terms of its ecosystem, the universities, and how the whole section works. Does that mean that can't be imitated or replicated on some level in other parts of the world? No, not at all. And I think the government here has been doing a fantastic job around that. And Cambridge itself is a very, very rich community of small companies, incubators, the universities. There's a lot of former ARM employees who are involved in startups here in the community. So I think Cambridge in particular, and also other parts of the UK, including Bristol, are very rich for innovation.
What do you think the government, today's government, but previous governments as well, have done wrong in terms of failing to attract tech companies to actually list here in the UK? Or is it that New York just has this gravitational pull that just can't be beaten?
I'm not a financial guy. I'm an engineer.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of give you just my layman's thought around that. I think the capital markets and scale. I guess maybe speak about the ARM, our own case. Very large capital market. The access to capital was very large in New York. I think that was one of the reasons that really drove that in our case. But I think broadly back to what really matters for ARM and myself is attracting world-class engineers. And the UK has always been a fantastic place for R&D and innovation, and I think it'll continue to be that way.
Okay. You've been meeting, you meet with regulators, you meet with lawmakers, of course, around the world. Have you been meeting with members of the Labour opposition party? And if so, what has your message been to them?
I have not. Yeah, so far not yet.
Okay. If they would, look, the polls have the Labour Party in a 20-point lead. There's a very good chance that they could be in government in 12 months' time or less. Yeah. Often governments set themselves 100 days in terms of to achieve big things in their first 100 days. What would you say to any incoming government, whether it's the Conservative government or a Labour Party government, that you would want to see happen in those first 100 days for your sector?
Yeah, specifically for ARM, as we talked about earlier, we're very committed to the UK. This is our home. We were born here. We intend to stay here. Please make it very easy for us to attract world-class talent and attract engineers to come work for ARM, because that is the single largest limiter that we will have for growth is access to talent. And if that gets any more difficult with a change in government that you described with the next election, that would be a headwind I would not want to have to engage on. So I would say my first message would be please make it easy for us to bring people in and hire, and if you can make it even easier, even better.
We've seen the debate around risks around generative AI blow out into the open with what's happened with OpenAI and Sam Altman. Where do you land on this? I just wonder, is there an element of this story that keeps you up at night, that concerns you? What are you most worried about within the evolution of generative AI?
That we lose control of the machines. I think to some extent, and the hows are still very much being debated, obviously, of having the fail-safe mechanisms in place that humans can override the systems. That is probably the single largest thing that I think and worry about, is that if the machines can be, or the algorithms, or whatever's being generated can be developed in such a way that there is no fail-safe mechanism, that it can be overridden by a human, that's what worries me.
Okay, that was Rene Haas, the CEO of ARM, speaking there exclusively to Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie about some of the challenges facing his business, but also some of the areas in which he feels optimistic about the future for the chip designer.
Yeah, absolutely. Great interview. Now, let's turn our attention, though, to something totally different. A new haven for the world's billionaires. So from hedge fund billionaire Ray Dalio to the Russian steel magnate Vladimir Lysin and India's Adani family, they have all set up special purpose vehicles in Abu Dhabi. Bloomberg has been sifting through the hundreds of corporate filings to understand the moves that have taken place this year. Bloomberg's Ben Bartenstein covers the Middle East in Dubai, and he joins us now for more. Ben, really interesting piece. Why are so many billionaires shifting to Abu Dhabi?
Well, part of this goes back to the COVID days. The UAE was very successful in the early days of COVID in keeping open for business and attracting some of the wealthy from Europe and Asia and the US. Then that extended to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the UAE taking more of a geopolitically neutral stance that once again attracted more high net worth individuals. And more broadly speaking, ADGM, Abu Dhabi Global Market, which is the international financial center in the capital, has really been sort of leveraging the fact that the Abu Dhabi is home to so much capital from both sovereign wealth funds and private investment firms to say for investors who've previously done business with them, if you want to continue to do business, you should really shift more of your assets and your companies here.
So who are some of those high net worth individuals who've moved?
So everyone from CZ, the richest man in crypto, the former Binance CEO, to the Adani family, so the second richest family in India, to Ray Dalio, as you mentioned, the hedge fund billionaire from the US, to Vladimir Lysin, who's the fourth wealthiest man in Russia, to Murtaza Lakhani, the prominent oil trader, Sheikh Tahnoon, who is the UAE National Security Advisor. A number of his entities have registered SPVs. And most recently, Nassif Sawiris, the richest man in Egypt, told us last week that he's planning to set up an Abu Dhabi Global Market as well.
Wow, it's becoming quite a magnet then, isn't it? So which jurisdictions are losing out, do you think?
Well, it's interesting. We looked at the data from both the BVI and the Caymans just as two examples because we were hearing anecdotally about a shift in wealth from the Caribbean. And it's interesting to see that their data points to a decade low for corporate registrations. We're also hearing about some shifting of assets from Singapore, from Mauritius, and Switzerland to Abu Dhabi as well.
What is it about Abu Dhabi Global Markets SPVs that make them particularly appealing?
Part of it is the comfort that comes with the legal structure. It's English common law, so that's more comfortable and familiar to a lot of international investors. Also, just the guarantees as far as ring fencing assets. Certain folks who may have legal challenges in other jurisdictions are given certain guarantees as far as sort of safeguarding their assets within Abu Dhabi. And of course, it has the sort of low taxation appeal that a lot of the Caribbean places have had as well. And then more recently, we've seen sort of Abu Dhabi flexing its geopolitical neutrality, which is appealing for certain individuals who may feel that they're judged based on their nationality and maybe are less welcome in other jurisdictions.
Wow, so borrowing from, yes, a lot of other jurisdictions then. What assets, though, have you found that the SPVs actually hold?
So a lot of these SPVs hold a mixture of both equities, but they can also hold property assets as well. Part of this goes back to sort of, planning for the future for individuals, looking to pass on their assets after their death. And the fact that the UAE legal structure onshore has certain, Muslim legal codes that, codify a certain standard for how the assets are passed along. And ADGM has sort of, its own unique structure where you can, more clearly designate who in the family were to take over the assets. But also we've seen, like in the instance of Dalio, where, family offices are registered under the SPV structure as well.
Ben, talk to us about where we are in this trend. Are we approaching a peak? What's the outlook look like for this movement to Abu Dhabi from here?
That is the big question. I mean, this year was pretty much a landmark year for ADGM as far as SPV creation, but just more broadly in attracting kind of a who's who of global players from Dalio to Brevin Howard and many others. I guess the broader question, as we saw in the case of the BVI and Caymans as two examples, is, they have traditionally been great at attracting a number of special purpose vehicles. Ultimately, that attracted greater scrutiny, though. So I guess the question is, Abu Dhabi's been very successful in the past few years at attracting these high net worth individuals. At a certain point, just naturally, that would attract a bit more scrutiny. So that is, I guess, is the question going into 2024, is whether this trend will continue.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.